Emily, thank you. This past year has underscored just how important it is for those of us that are economic development professionals to be more flexible in dealing with unforeseen crises as they occur throughout the year. As community leaders, we've had to step up our game because of the pandemic, and we're all applying a full complement of our skills and expertise in a way that we've never had to before. None of us saw this pandemic coming. And certainly we've all had to deal with it head on, and in most cases on the front lines. How do you get to be capable of dealing with that kind of change and that kind of crisis? Well, becoming certified is one way to do that. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar entitled How IEDC's CEcD Credential Can Boost Your Career Trajectory. I'm Bob Leake Jr. I'm president of Whitaker Park Development Authority in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I've been in economic development since 1981. I received or earned, I guess, my certification back in 1990. Back then, the only way to get the Certified Economic Development certification was to attend the Economic Development Institute, which was a 3-week, 1 week a year for 3-year program at Oklahoma University in Norman, Oklahoma. And then you sat for this CED exam and hopefully passed and went on to become a certified economic developer. Things have certainly changed. This has gotten much more challenging as a certification, but I think much more valuable because of the depth of education that's required to get it. The designation originally was known as a CID, which is Certified Industrial Developer. Then in the late 80s, early 90s, it changed to CED, which is Certified Economic Developer. And then now it is known as Certified Economic and Community Developer. And that is what the CEcD stands for today. Well, I have the great honor of welcoming all of you to today's webinar. I'm going to be introducing our presenters in just a moment and then moderating the discussion. As was said before we started, feel free to submit questions throughout the course of this webinar. This is for you. We hope it'll be informal and as close to a discussion as we can have on video, but we welcome your questions and look forward to responding to those as we get into it. But before I introduce today's panel, I want to take a minute and thank our annual sponsors, because without their generosity and their continued support of NCEDA, programs like this would not be possible. Emily is scrolling the names right now. Take a minute to look at those, and then when you get a chance, please reach out and thank those sponsors for their continued support of NCEDA. It makes all the difference in the world, and we're delighted to have them support what we're doing through education and other programming at NCEDA. The Certified Economic and Community Developer designation is now held by over 1,100 economic development professionals worldwide, according to IEDC, which is the group that developed and administers the program. A lot of folks would say that the CEcD is the gold standard for excellence in our profession. It unites leaders through a baseline of foundation and a core of knowledge that you all kind of work toward to get that designation. Once earned, it signifies your status and credibility in the field of economic development to stakeholders across North Carolina and literally around the world. Go to a lot of conferences and see people wearing their CEcD pins and being involved in all kinds of economic development leadership throughout the country. The CEcD is, of course, one of the only, not the only venue available to gain additional accreditation. There are other programs like the Masters in Economic Development programs at a number of universities, including Vanderbilt and Mississippi State. South Carolina started a certification a few years ago for South Carolina practitioners to become certified in economic development with a focus on South Carolina. And our own Charles Hayes, who I believe is attending the conference today, has been actively involved along with NCEDA in starting the North Carolina Economic Development Certification, a program that is offered through a partnership with NCEDA and East Carolina University. And if you want to learn more about that one and how the North Carolina certification could help you, NCEDA will be hosting a webinar on March 2nd that will dive deeper into that particular program and answer questions that you might have. So in the meantime, what sets a CEcD apart from the rest of us practicing economic developers. What are the requirements for earning this designation? How much does it cost? How hard is it to get? Why bother doing it in the first place? How long does it take? Once you get it, what do you have to do to keep it? And what are the other benefits for those who hold this designation? Well, with us to help answer the questions today is a panel of North Carolina economic development professional leaders drawn from local organizations, private allies, and academic partners. Each holds or is working toward achieving the CECD credential and can speak to its costs and benefits. So in no particular order, I would like to introduce our panelists for today. First is Alyssa Bird. Alyssa is the Economic Development Director for the town of Fuquay-Varina. She's currently co-chair of NCEDA's Emerging Executive Group and is the 2019 recipient of NCEDA's Governor James E. Holshouser Professional Development Scholarship. Alyssa has completed the coursework for her certification and plans to take the CECD exam maybe as early as this June. Next will be Joe Melvin. Joe is the Director of Business Development at North Carolina's Southeast. He earned his CECD designation in 2018. So as a recent recipient, he'll be able to answer questions on what the current process is all about. Dr. Pat Mitchell is Assistant Professor in the Department of Government and Justice Studies at Appalachian State University. She earned her CECD in 2009. Pat is immediate past president of NCEDA and a member of the NCEDA Board of Directors. And finally, Carl Reese is Senior Economic Development Director at Electricities of North Carolina, located in Raleigh. And he has the most recent earned his CECD designation in 2018. So I want to welcome all four of those folks and thank them for joining us today to share their expertise in what it takes to become a certified economic and community developer. Now, for our guests that are joining us today, thank you again for being here. What we're going to do is each panelist is going to start out by answering the following question, and that is, what considerations prompted you to take the path to become IEDC certified? So each panelist will take a few minutes to answer that and then add a little bit of additional information about their particular journey through the certification process. So we'll start with Alyssa, then we'll follow up with Joe, then Pat, and then Carl. Then we will take questions from the audience. And if you don't have any, we've prepared a few to get it started. So with that, sit back and enjoy. And Alyssa, please tell us about what's going on with you and your journey to certification.
Thanks, Bob. I'm doing this because I want to be the best I can be at my job. This is the certification and I want the training. I want to push myself. And I think this is a big professional and personal accomplishment. So that's why I am pursuing it. And of course, Bob mentioned this, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention it again. But NCEDA, so supportive with their professional development and the scholarships they offer. And that application period is open now for this year. And because of that support, I was able to complete the Economic Development Institute through Oklahoma University. So that was a big boost through this organization. And I am the odd one out. I don't have my certification, but my message today is that the CECD isn't really something you can do on a whim or cram in to 6 months. It takes intention and commitment and planning. And that's what I've really learned over the past couple of years. And IEDC makes you work to get to the point where you can even be eligible to sit for the exam. And I think everyone else here will share that they make you work to keep that certification. And I won't go into too much detail because you can find a lot of this information on IED's website, but there's professional experience requirements, coursework, actually applying to take the exam, and everything is offered on a limited basis. So you really have to plan and map it out to get your timing right, considering your budget and what your organization has capacity for, and really taking time to immerse yourself in the subject. And so one of the things I've learned is you can talk to your peers about it, and they're really helpful in giving solid advice. So with that, I'll turn it over to the next person.
Thanks, Alyssa. Joe, you're up.
All right, thank you, Bob. I think you described it well when you said, what made you go on this journey? And it will be quite a journey from the time that you come out of the gate until you never pass the finish line, because it's a continuing thing based off of why you want to do this for personal and professional reasons. So a couple of things that I would mention to help frame up some later conversation is sort of three Ps. The first being the purpose, and whether that's a professional purpose or a personal purpose and things that you want to achieve. And if there's a certain designation and classification that you want to, as you seek to be a professional. I think Alyssa described that extremely well. Not everybody, 11,000 sounds like a big number, Bob, but of all the folks involved in economic development globally, it's a pretty small number. So I think looking within yourself and your organizational structure as to why do you want to do this? And I know we'll spend a lot of time on what the second P is, which is the process. I think Alyssa said it well. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And thinking through and talking with other folks about the time that's going to be needed to go through that. What is the test taking like? What is the stress, the anxiety? What's going to be the jubilation when you finally get your PIN? And then thinking about what that process is going to be of how you maintain that certification. And lastly, the one I want to focus on a little bit more in depth is the promotion of that and what a CED can do for you to promote your career. It puts you in a little different category of folks, and folks locally and statewide and nationally will see you as someone that's achieved a high degree of excellence, and people recognize what that means in our profession. Secondly, just the professionalism, I would say within NCEDA, which has several certified individuals on the screen here and some others that are not, but also what that means for the state of North Carolina. And so as site selectors and companies are here, doesn't necessarily make you better than anybody that doesn't have a CED credential, but I think folks can really understand that, you have striven to be the best in your profession that you possibly can be. And I think it represents NCEDA well. And lastly, something we'll talk about later in promotion is promotional responsibility that I think we have as recipients to help Alyssa and other folks and that are seeking to get this certification, help them understand that it's a tough process, but it can be accomplished. And so if we want to grow that professionalism in our state, within our organization, I think that it is incumbent upon us to reach out and help those folks and share our struggles and our joys.
Great. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. And I'll turn it over to Pat.
Okay. Glad you all are here today. As they mentioned, I became certified in 2009, and I had a little bit different route. I became an economic developer out of a university. I was teaching at East Carolina University in their Master of Public Administration program. They asked me to develop a course in economic development, and I did. And once I taught that course, I decided I wanted to do it rather than teach it. And I had an opportunity to become the economic developer for Ashe County. I moved across the state to take that position. I have always, in almost any position I've been in, set a professional goal for myself. And once I became a director of economic development, I decided that I wanted to meet the standard of that profession. And so within the first year I was in Ashe County, which would have been 2004, I guess, I decided that that's what I was going to go after, is the certification in IEDC. At that time, when I began, you had to be an active full-time professional developer before you would be allowed to sit for the exam, and which was perfect timing for me because it gave me 4 years to get the coursework in. So I started immediately with the basic course at Chapel Hill, and then I did my certification through the Institute. I did 2 institutes in Oklahoma and 1 in Indianapolis. And by the time I finished those 4 events, then I was able to sit for the exam. I have found in the economic development profession, let me put it this way. I haven't found anyone that does not seem to believe in lifelong learning. And I think through the certification process and the events that we participate in through NCEDA and IEDC is an example of that lifelong learning. And so that's, why I am where I am today, keep up my certification is for that lifelong learning.
Thank you, Pat. And Pat and Carl are unique. They're not practitioners at the community level, but both have sought to get their certification. I'm going to ask Carl to comment a little bit on his thought process about doing that as he answers that. So Carl, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Bob, and thanks to my colleagues on the panel, and thanks to those of you that decided to spend a little bit of your afternoon with us today. For me, my path in economic development began about right at 20 years ago, actually, and probably at least for the first half of those 20 years, if not beyond, I was a primary consumer of information around economic development. I wanted to learn everything that I could, and thinking about this as I prepared a little bit for today, I actually thought back about, I must have really bugged some people to death thinking back of it. The particular story I'm going to tell, it's sad this gentleman is no longer with us, but a gentleman named Ken Atkins that some of y'all may know used to be Economic Development Director for Wake County, North Carolina. And in retrospect, I can't believe I used to ask Ken to do this. But when I would lose a project, I would actually sort of red team exercise with Ken, and I'd send him everything about the project and everything we did and say, Ken, would you look at this? Is there anything you would have done differently? Is there anything we could have done? And as busy as he was, he actually did this several times for me, but so much that I learned from a variety of people. Pat Mitchell, who's on the call, took courses in economic development from Pat at ECU in grad school, and used to call and email her about stuff. But nonetheless, I was a primary consumer of information. And as I got in the last few years, probably in the last 5 years or so, I began seeing, one, that some people were turning to me to some extent and asking questions, but two, that I felt like I had things that I could add to the body of knowledge in economic development in North Carolina, or hopefully nationally. And I think the way to sort of join that body of peers who are at that point is to go through the certification process. And so I did. But the other side to that coin is, and I mentioned this as we got together a couple of days ago with this group to prep for this, and I know, having talked to some other economic developers and maybe some of you that are on the call today, that there is some anxiety and some uncertainty around how ready you are to actually do this, and even just, fear. Will I pass? What happens if I don't pass? I've wasted a lot of money, those kind of things. And so I went through some of that. I put off actually taking the test for more than a year after I had all the requirements that were in place to do it. And finally, with some coaxing from my spouse and my boss and some others, just jumped in there and took it, and everything went well. I'd worked very hard and was prepared for it. But it's a tough process. I'm sure we'll dig into the details on it as we move forward. But if you, like many other things, if you're willing to put the time and effort into it, I think there's most people that I know in economic development that can get through it and end up with that credential.
Great. Carl, thank you. And thanks to everyone. And again, we'd love to hear from you in the audience. If you'll go down to the bottom to the Q&A box, type in your questions. We'll be happy to begin to address those. Don't have any in there at the moment, so I'll start out. And a couple of comments before I ask the next question. And I think what I heard just about everybody say was, one, they did it because this represents the peak of the profession. If you're going to be a professional economic developer, you want to achieve that. It's like being a CPA. You get your CPA when you're an accountant. This is the same type of thing, and it shows a level of commitment to the industry. And the other thing I heard from everybody was that this is not something that you just kind of wake up and decide you're going to go take the test here in a week or two. It is a process. You have to have a number of years as an actual practitioner. You have to study. You have to take the exam. You have to pass the exam. The exam is 3 parts, and you have to pass all 3. So it's it is a process, and one that does take a little bit of time to do. But I'll tell you, as one who probably the oldest economic developer on this panel, I've hired a number of people over the years, and I always looked at CED or CECD as kind of it was kind of the gatekeeper for me. You know, we would always put in the application process, you know, CECD either required or preferred, and we would use it as a weed out tool because it quickly told us if you had it, we know that you have been focused as an economic developer and that you had done above and beyond the call, if you will, to prepare yourself for that as a career. And I always made sure that the people that work for me had the opportunity, if they wanted it, to pursue getting their certification. And each of them did. The last one being Tyler Chaffee, who all of you know. Tyler's moved on to Tennessee, but he was actively involved in working on getting his certification when he left Winston and moved to Tennessee. So it's an important designation. If you choose economic development as your career path, is certainly something that you ought to be looking at and thinking about. One of the questions that I have, and we've alluded to it a little bit, but I'll ask Joe and Pat to comment on this one, and that is, you know, what are the requirements to keep your certification once you've earned it? You've heard how challenging it is to get the certification. What you need to understand is there is both a financial and a continuing education responsibility that's attached to that. So Pat, you want to start, and then Joe, if you'll jump in, tell a little bit about how do you keep your certification once you get it?
Sure. You have to recertify every 3 years. A few years ago, they put an ethics course into that, and you have to take the ethics course as a part of that certification. And I've taken several ethics courses, and it's probably the most stringent ethics course of any that I have been involved in. So you have to keep up with what the requirements are. There are certain professional developments you have to do. Some of that you have to get through IEDC. Others of it, it's NCEDA events count towards that. And then when you recertify, you pay a fee for that to recertify. Don't have to take the test again, but you do have a renewal fee for that. Joe?
Yeah, Dr. Mitchell, some good points. You do have that 3-year period, and you have to get 12 total points, and they've got some level 1, level 2, level 3, or ABC points in different events that IEDC offers. Allow you to get some credit toward that. Fortunately, as you had mentioned, NCEDA conferences allow for you to get that. But the thing is, you need to go in, and a lot of people will get certified but didn't have a plan about the recertification, or maybe didn't completely understand that. And so one of the strategies that I've used, I've been very fortunate, North Carolina Southeast has encouraged me to get this and supported, is to be able to go to an annual conference if you have the financial bandwidth to do that. That's worth 3 points. Being a grader, which I know we'll talk about later, because if you really want to understand the process that you just came through, I think being a grader will get you another 2 points. And then if you participate as a panelist, can get you a point there. So there are creative ways that you can really do that in one shot. But really, a lot of people wait until the last moment. I think IEDC has expanded, so some of the webinars, if you're a presenter, those are worth some points as well. So, you know, being very strategic about how to do that. Make sure you have it. You have another application you have to fill out electronically. You have to get that submitted by a certain date. I just got recertified for the next 3 years. You get a really cool certificate that you can hang on your wall that shows that you're certified. You keep your original pen that you have. Bob has a couple of them. He's been around a few more years than the rest of us have. But yeah, so just thinking about a certification process, but staying engaged with that leadership at IEDC, planning out your schedule and how that's going to work in and around your daily activities. You have to be as intentional about that as you are about the original certification, Bob.
Joe, thank you, Pat, as well. And I agree, it is a process. And once you're certified, the sooner you can work on getting your points to recertify, the better. because inevitably it's going to come down to that third year and you're going to get an email from IEDC and they're going to say, hey, you're up for recertification, and you realize you're X number of points short and you're starting to scramble to figure out how to get those points. And so, be intentional about it, and you can get them. There's a lot of opportunities to do that. So thank you for that. Let me switch over to Carl and Alyssa for a minute. Alyssa kind of mentioned it a little bit, but I want you to go into a little more detail if you would. But if you both tell us about the opportunity you've had to expand your network, both domestically and internationally, through not only the courses you've taken, but the certification process and people you've met along the way, either at EDI or through seminars or at meetings where you've been working on this program. So Carl, you want to go first, and then Alyssa will follow up with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I mentioned I've been at this for a while, and I started taking IEDC courses. I think the first one I took may have been on real estate, but it's been a while. But took many of them, and each time you've got subject matter experts who are leading those classes, and so they instantly come into the fold as part of your network. And some I may have never contacted again, others I would contact multiple times. Same thing. Ultimately, I wound up going into OU EDI, and the same thing there. I've got folks in that group that I correspond with and rely on even to this day, and exchange ideas with. But I do think ultimately, and I mentioned this earlier, I think when we were prepping, that in my studies for the exam, I found just this group of wonderful mentors, for lack of a better word, across the country and close to home here in North Carolina. Some of them were new friends, some of them were old friends, but who helped guide me, helped me, think about the things that I needed to do to prepare. And that was just such a, really in a way, an intimate experience for them to help me with something that was so important to me and difficult, and ultimately share my success at the end. And so just like everything else we do through that process, you do build a network and add to your network, and it's a great experience.
Yeah, I would echo that. And traveling to the courses, of course, it's a little different now. I've done both the online coursework through EDI and gone to the in-person institutes. And, going to the in-person institutes, I really built some good relationships to where I had a little core group of people, and we have stayed in touch for the past 18 months later, when we have a little text group and we are cheering each other on and sharing our accomplishments and following each other's personal or professional moves. And so, it's expanding who we know. It's, now I have a good connection in Utah and get to see what they're doing in Utah, and another in the Myrtle Beach area, and learning how these different professionals are doing in their regions, and taking some of those best practices back to my community. And I always I will credit Indira Everett with Duke Energy, who taught me the term R&D, rip off and duplicate. And which you can't duplicate, exactly carbon copy what you learn from others. You have to make it fit your community, but you really get inspired by the people that you meet along the road in this journey.
Yeah, and they become your best friends. You look forward to seeing them at conferences. You look forward to talking to them, and they're people you might not have ever met had you not gone through the process. So that's kind of cool. We've got a few questions that have come in. Let me start first with an FYI. That is that IEDC is going to have a CEcD exam essentials workshop from 2:30 to 4 p.m. this Thursday. It's free, but you have to register. So go to IEDC's website and register for that. One of the first questions that has come in, and I'll kind of open this up to the panel to jump in. Let's kind of limit it to 2 answers, unless you have a burning desire to add something that has not been commented on the question. And that is, aside from self-development, where has the certification been the most beneficial to you in your economic development profession?
I'll start with that, Bob.
Okay, Pat. Thank you.
It has benefited me by doors that it has opened. There have been opportunities I've had to either speak to a group, to interact, to mentor, because of having that designation. I think one of the most rewarding to me has been, I've had students, I teach economic development as well as other public classes. I've had students ask, what does that CECD stand for at the end of your name? And so I tell them, and they will make comments about or ask questions. Why do you keep up certification for that if now you're a professor? Well, I tell them I expect them to believe in professional development and do that in their public professions. And so for me, it sets an example to students that I work with every semester that, you know, that lifelong learner thing.
Bob, I'd like to build on some things that Alyssa and Carl touched on that. And as part of the preparation process, there are multiple subject areas that you have to study for: finance, could be entrepreneur, small business, real estate development, reuse, marketing, finance. And so I think the process itself encourages you to stretch yourself and touch some areas. I mean, you know, like we're a marketing lead gen entity, but to understand more core components of economic development, I think it helps you in that way, to the point that of building your professional networks. You know, one of my dearest friends now runs the New Orleans Business Alliance because we struggled, failed half the test, and came back and took it and passed it. But I think it provides you a network nationally and globally where when you're bumping against an issue or thinking about a new strategy professionally to maybe implement, you can reach out to people, not just within your state, but folks that you know now and that you trust. And it gives you a little different view and flavor of how you might do your work differently.
Good. So thank you. A follow-up question to that is, what do you think the overall cost was for you to become certified? And what is the ROI? In other words, has it provided a positive ROI based on what it cost you to get the certification? So Alyssa, you can't answer that one yet, but we'll ask the others to comment on how they see the return on the investment.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at starting with that. And I think the first thing you have to do is recognize that every organization is a little bit different. And so I think this answer could definitely vary. I work for a service organization that works statewide in the state of North Carolina with more than 70 cities and towns in North Carolina. The technical capacity in those cities and towns ranges widely, you know, from communities like High Point and Gastonia, maybe, who have, you know, pretty advanced economic development organizations that support them either regionally or countywide or in the city, down to little teeny places in Eastern North Carolina that have maybe 200-300 people that live in the town and have a town clerk is the only official there in the town. And so it is an expensive process when you take into account either doing OUEDI or all of the IEDC classes, and then sitting for the exam, and then, you know, doing the continuing education and recertification. You know, we're talking well into the thousands of dollars, probably $5,000 to $10,000 in total. But again, in our case, that is spread out across an entire state, where in many of these communities, and not to exclude the Gastonians and High Points, because we bring different things to different communities in what they're working on. But you know, I think for our organization, there was great value in supporting that, and having people across the board at our organization that are at the top of their careers and top of their education to support our public power communities in North Carolina.
I think that some that go into the certification process, for some organizations, it is an automatic salary increase. For the county that I worked for, 27,000 population, I knew it was not going to affect my salary. But Ashe County did pay for every bit of my travel, my food, the cost of registration while I was there, the recertification. And probably it was around $12,000 if you include registrations, air flights to Oklahoma, to Indiana, and all of that. The people I work for in Ashe County never questioned that professional development expense. When I went to Commerce and headed up the rural division, what I learned in IEDC and through that process aided me personally greatly in some of the situations that I dealt with at Commerce. Great deal of ROI to me, a great deal of appreciation to Ashe County that they believed in me enough that they paid all that expense during the 9 years I was in Ashe County.
Right. And you got to remember, it's paid over a number of years. You know, it's not $12,000 or $10,000 up front. It's over the time period at which you are working to take the test. It could be 5, it could be 8 or 10 years. It doesn't have to be done in 3 or 4. And the other thing is, some of these events you might possibly be attending anyway. So it's hard to add a cost to that if you were going to go anyway. So, you know, if your organization is a member of IEDC and, you know, you had the opportunity to go to one of their annual meetings or something like that, if you're able to sit through one of their training programs by going early on the weekend, then you could pick up some of that spread on your normal travel budget that you might have as an organization. But no doubt it is expensive, and it is you know, not something that you enter into lightly. You definitely want the support of your organization. A great follow-up question to that was just asked, and that is, what tips do you have for emerging executives that want to become certified, but their employers don't have the budget to send them? So, Alyssa, why don't you comment on the scholarship process, because that's one piece right there, and then others might have ideas as well.
I've been through that, where you just simply don't have the budget. And first, I think it goes back to the whole, you can't do this, you can't cram it all in 6 months. You have to be methodical and planning it out with budgets, and you don't have to do it all in 24 months. It can be extended. But I would say, you know, NCEDA offers multiple scholarship opportunities, and especially right now, while things are online, you are cutting out your hotel, your food, your flight. It's, you know, it's half the price at least doing these online courses. And so hopefully some of that is here to stay. But, you know, look at the NCEDA scholarship opportunities and go for that as a way to supplement. I would also say that the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill probably offers one of the best basic courses in the entire country, right here, you know, in the center of our state. So very accessible, and that's still a commitment because although it might be online this year, but it is an excellent course right here, homegrown. But, you know, I think talking to your employer about how opportunities for advancement are part of job satisfaction, that your success is their success. And this certification, it's no different than a PE for an engineer or the AICP designation for a planner. It is the professional designation for economic developers. So, you know, making that argument of how it's tied to long-term success for both you and the organization, and then taking advantage of these opportunities through organizations, your membership, or who knows, even maybe allies who might want to be supportive of your effort. I know when I worked in Chatham County, Duke Energy was financially supported some opportunities for me to get some professional development. So, you know, you're not by yourself in this effort.
Very good. Anybody else got a comment on that?
She gave the perfect answer. And I think that working with your employer, helping to educate your employer on the importance of something like this, I think helps improve the organization and their understanding. I wouldn't add anything to it.
Yeah, some organizations have a fear that you know, you're going to get all educated up and move on, and that they're going to spend a whole lot of money to get you there. And you know, what we did for most of our crowd was we would agree to pay for things like that if they would give us some time kind of on the back end. So, you know, we would pay for 3 years of your education and all the costs, but we'd like for you to stay for 2 years after you get through the programming. Now, you can't make somebody stay. I mean, obviously, if an opportunity comes up, but most people would agree to do that. And that way the organization is benefiting from the expenditure of the dollars on the person. And, I don't think any organization that's worth working for can argue that improving the capability of the employees to do their job, should be right there at the top of the list of things that you want to do. Now, having said that, there are a lot of communities that are small and whose budgets are challenged. And so, to Alyssa's point, finding, additional dollars that are out there, whether it's through scholarship, NCEDA, et cetera, or whether, asking, for additional investors in your program with a idea that a portion of that might go to help on training and education of employees, things like that, ought to be a way to do that. And your point is very well taken, Alyssa, that right now you can do things online. You don't have to travel. You don't have to buy a plane ticket, do the hotel, spend time away from the office. You can do things online and pick up a lot of that knowledge that way. So very, very good answers. So no other new questions. So I'll go back to my list, and I'm going to ask Alyssa and Joe on this one. Did the experiences that you have as an economic development practitioner help or hinder you in the process? And I know right now, Alyssa, you haven't yet passed it, but you're going to. So, as being a professional in this business, has that helped or hindered or anything like that? We'll start with Alyssa.
All right. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's really helped. One thing that you will hear, I think, from others who have taken the test is that kind of your textbooks are your Bibles when it comes, or your version of your economic development Bibles, of learning what is in those manuals, the IEDC manuals, because a lot of the test comes straight from the manuals. So I think that each of our communities, we probably have our focus and what we're really comfortable with. But for me, I recently changed jobs from a rural community to a more urban, suburban community. So the transition is kind of making me rewire a little bit in how I approach economic development. So I will be honest, it made me a little skittish when it came to the test and having to interview, because I have to redevelop that confidence in my new role that I had in my previous role. So I think exposure within to different areas of economic development and practicing through that is really helpful. Reading through those manuals, also really good. So yes, it's helpful and hinders.
Good. Joe?
Yeah, I would add, that's a great point, Alyssa, that the manuals are your Bible. You go to the classes, you got great presenters, you make great colleagues. You hear about how as a practitioner, economic development works, but the test on the essay side is about the books. The conversation and your professional experiences, I think, help you on the multiple choice short answer component of that. But IEDC, Bob, as you had mentioned, does have a 4 or 5 year requirement that you must be in the business prior to being able to sit for the exam. So I think you need that. Blend in some things in the textbooks. You do marketing. You think, well, I know marketing, but sometimes you begin to blast through parts of that within that particular manual or that section, and you miss some very salient pieces of that. I think most of the people that I talk to, if you don't touch the finance side, you feel really skittish about that particular essay that's coming down the pipe. So I think it does serve as that foundational core of what you're going to be able to build on with that. But I think the inverse of being able to take some of those other things, as I mentioned, stretching yourself, touching some areas that you haven't before, it is going to make you more well broad versed. So that if you move from, as Alyssa said, rural to urban, if you move from county to regional or region to go run a program like Dr. Mitchell did at NC Commerce, that broad-based approach is going to make you a better professional.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And I thought Alyssa's answer was absolutely right. The answer is yes. I think sometimes, particularly if you've been in the profession for a while, and then you begin this process, you might think you already know more than you know about different topics just because you've been around it. But to Joe's point, they test from the books. You know, they test for details, and when we grade, we're looking for details. You know, it's easy to find those that are trying to kind of BS their way through the answer, and you know, there is a very specific answer to the questions that are asked, and they're asked to determine the level of your expertise and knowledge. And so, you know, while your professional background is critical to the process, not only to get to the designation, but to keep it, the flip side of that is that book learning and those meetings are very, very important. So thank you both. Pat, answer this one for me. I think I know the answer, but someone asked, would someone who has already taken 1 year of the EDI, OU EDI Institute still qualify for a NCEDA scholarship? I think the answer is yes.
Yes,
I
it's
think
my understanding.
apply for, yeah, and be eligible. They would just pay for the remaining years versus
Right.
the 3. So yes, feel free to make your application and do that. Carl and Joe, how long did it take you guys start to finish to earn your designation?
I'll lead off if you don't mind, Joe. And I was actually wanting to lead off because I wanted to mention one thing in case we don't get to it, about the books and so on. You know, it was mentioned that so much comes directly from the books, and that, you know, you may be stronger in one area than another. One of the things that someone had said to me is, in each of the books, be sure to go to the back to where all the terms and definitions are listed, and be sure that you're familiar with all those. And there's, for any of you that are thinking about doing this and don't know the books, these are the IEDC manuals. There's 6 or so of them, and the number of terms in the back is a little bit mind-boggling. What surprised me was, upon initial review, I would look at a term, I go, I know what that is. And then I'd see their definition and I'd go, oh, there's some pieces of this that I better memorize. Because yeah, I know generally what it was, but if they're going to ask me to name the 3 of these that are part of that term, I couldn't name the 3 of those. I just knew what it was. And so as awful as this probably sounds to most people, and it was to me, I mean, I had literally index cards taller, if you stack them all, taller than 1 foot high, that I studied over the course of 5 or 6 months, because they're even though I might know what a particular thing was, there were just intricacies to what I was worried about that I might be asked. And then once I got to the exam, realized I was going to be asked that I needed to know. So you know, that was that part. And then in terms of how long it took me, you know, I mentioned it earlier, it was kind of stop and start in my case. And so I started taking a bunch of the IEDC courses over a long period of time, dating back to the early 2000s. But then when I really got serious about this, it seemed that the quickest way to get this done was to do OU EDI. And so I went to 1 live session, did the rest of it online over a little over 1.5 years, we'll call it. Then kind of fooled around saying I was going to take the exam for 1 year and didn't, and then committed myself to study from basically Thanksgiving to Easter, and took the exam in April. So
Good, thank you. Joe?
Well, my path took a little bit longer, Bob. I started in 2008 here, took my first IEDC class in 2009, and did not get certified for another 9 years.
Mhm.
You know, and wasn't because I didn't want to, but you know, the blocking and tackling of economic development kind of got in the way, until Steve and I finally had a conversation and said, you know, all the way to our board chair, which I know something we've touched on about the level of involvement that you need throughout your entire organization, that, you know, we really want this for our organization. And more importantly, we want it for you as a professional in our business and within our company. And so, you know, to Carl's point and to Alyssa's point, I probably spent 6 months going through those manuals. I was fortunate enough that 4 days a week, I could put my phone on D&D at 3 o'clock over the last couple of months, and spend 2 hours in the office studying. That's the level of commitment that I'm very blessed that my organization put into receiving that. But the run up in the last couple of weeks, so Alyssa, get ready for this. I mean, you'll be spending those days, you'll be spending your weekends doing those kind of things, but it is time, as Carl said, that is well spent. Don't shortchange yourself and think that you can BS through there, because the grading is very specific. And if you want to go off and talk about this, that, and the other, it's just not going to happen. You will almost smudge the ink on those manuals. You will look through them so much. And prepping, and I do want to mention online Quizlet. If you have children, some of you might have used it to study for some stuff. Great online resource. It's free to study, so no cost involved in that. But yeah, so it took me almost 10 years, Bob, from the day I started till I got my pen.
Good job. So the question on everybody's mind, I'm sure, is we go through all this, I get my certification, I spend 5 years, 10 years, however many years it takes to get it. We spend untold amount of money, both, maybe personally, some professionally, a corporation sends you. How has getting your certification impacted your earning potential as an economic developer? If each of you would take just a moment and comment on that, I would appreciate it. So we'll start with Dr. Pat and work our way through Carl, Alyssa, and then to Joe.
That's hard to get a number on, Bob. I did it originally knowing that I would not get increased salary when I got certified in Ashe County. However, they invested all that money in me that really had a return on it as I've gone through other careers since I left Ashe County. So I don't know. I couldn't put an answer to that or a number to it. I feel very personally fulfilled because I have it, and I'm in a position now when I recertify next summer, it's going to be on my dime, not the university's dime. And I still feel committed to do that. I'm still going to do what I need to do this year to make sure that I can meet that certification.
Great. Carl?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer for me is to be determined. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't necessarily go down this path for the money. I have the bulk of my career, even in a slightly different way currently, has been a public career working for public entities. I do think that at some point in my future, I will probably look to do some consulting work. And when that day comes, I would think being able to put that CECD on my resume would help with some of that work, I would guess. Just haven't gotten there yet.
Alyssa?
So not applicable yet, but I actually have worked with an organization where as we were hiring someone for a position, that was part of the offer that said, once you obtain your CEcD, you will get a raise in X amount, which it was a substantial raise. So that was tied to, much like you mentioned, listing CEcD preferred or required. That was a consideration, and it was, the job offer said, once you do this, you're going to get a boost. So yeah, there was a direct impact there.
Good. Joe?
Yeah, I told Steve Yost, our president, if I was going to hold the same designation as Bob Leake, I wanted Bob Leake money moving forward. So
I hope you got it. I hope you got it, my friend.
We'll talk about that down the road. But no, I was very fortunate that because, as I'd referenced previously, Bob, the support up to the board level, and Steve was being a certified developer, he understood the value of that. And, they put a pretty nice package out there and said, listen, we want to reward you. And really, and that's what it was. It wasn't trying to get you to stay or do all that. If the organization truly understands the value, and I think it does permeate throughout the organization and provides a little bit more bravado for the organization, so to speak, and designation. And so I was very fortunate in that it did equate to real dollars in that. And what that did for me, Bob, on a personal level, said, you know what, they invested in me on the front end, and they're willing to invest in me to stay here because they understand that's an organization that, you know, you can have some loyalty toward because it's very symbiotic in that relationship.
Yeah, and you know, if you don't see it in your current job, I think you'll see it potentially in the next job, because the designation may be what gets you the next job. You don't really know that, but okay, lightning round. We've got about 4 minutes left before we need to let everybody go back to work. The lightning round question, if each of you would answer this, please. What is the one piece of advice that you would offer someone interested in seeking the CECD designation? And I'll let you go. Okay, go, Alyssa.
Talk to Joe Melvin.
Okay, good.
I would say
Oh, Pat.
be passionate about wanting to do it for yourself as well as your organization. I think you get full value out of it then.
Good.
I'm a Carolina guy, but I'm still a line from the great Jim Valvano. Don't give up. Don't ever give up. If you fail a part of the test, keep pushing forward. Let those other people motivate you to continue to stay focused. To Dr. Mitchell's point, know why you want to do it and understand the value that comes with it. Just don't ever give up.
Good. And Carl.
I would say, unless you have a photographic memory, study harder than you've ever studied for anything in your life.
Very good. Thank you. It is your profession you're talking about. So all points well taken. Well, let me thank Alyssa, Joe, Pat, and Carl for your time today on this panel. I think, I know for me, it's been educational. It's been exciting to see everybody. I wish we could be there in person, but we're not in person, unfortunately. But I do hope that those of you that have joined us today in the audience will consider going through the process to earn your designation. And if you do, consider the panelists and other CEDs that are members of NCEDA as mentors and as resources that you can call with specific questions. So, you know, please do reach out. I'm sure all of us would be happy to help you any way that we possibly can. I hope that everybody found this discussion beneficial. Once again, I want to thank all of the NCEDA's annual sponsors for their continued support of our profession through their sponsorship of NCEDA and the programming that we put on, particularly through this year's virtual platform that we're having to follow. As we wrap up today, let me tell you a few other events that are coming up. Please mark your calendars. Now, the first is this Thursday from 4 to 5. That is going to be the gathering, a monthly gathering of the Power Hour Virtual Network event, which is a great way to stay informed, stay connected, and have some fun. And if you do tune in to IEDC's CECD seminar that's from 2:30 to 4, you're probably going to want a drink after you get through with that. So tuning into the Power Hour might be a good opportunity to do that. Next week on February 16th is the second installment of our two-part professional development series on retail economic development. Lacey Beasley from Retail Strategies is going to lead a presentation on tactics and best practices for bringing top retail to your community, retail and restaurants. Now that's from 11 o'clock until noon, again, 1 week from today, February 16th. And I want to thank Electricities for sponsoring that particular program. So Carl, thank you to your folks for stepping up on that. Later next week, the Emerging Executive Forum will feature a half day of networking, learning, and discussion entitled Theory and Practice, Discovering the Hidden Keys to Success. And so all of you young emerging execs, please join that event. It's sponsored by ECS of the Southeast. And again, that'll be on Thursday, February 18th. And then finally, the following week on February 24th, Ryan Nance will hold the final installment of his three-part professional development series on utilities with a 1-hour overview of water and wastewater resources. That's going to be from 11 until noon on February 24th. Then our spring conference, which is coming up, is going to be titled The Path Forward this year, and we're going to feature updates from key partners and expert discussion on topics such as life sciences, entrepreneurial development, broadband access, and an overview of the new USGA Golf House, which is being developed in Pinehurst. So plan to participate in NCEDA's spring conference, March 16th and 17th. As always, watch your emails, read our e-newsletters. That's where registration information and details on upcoming events are going to be. In the meantime, I want to again thank our panelists, Dr. Mitchell, Joe Melvin, Carl Reese, and Alyssa Berg for being with us today. I want to thank all of you for taking your time to be with us today. Be safe. We are adjourned.